Philip mentioned earlier, he asked the question, but what happens to the young people who come from families who aren't from religious backgrounds, who don't learn Bible in school, who don't go to church and don't go to Sunday school? Well, in my case, they become biblical scholars. Philip asked, does it matter if biblical literacy is in decline? Well, I'm going to argue, very similar to Philip as well, that yes, it matters. But that's really not because I think that to be considered truly educated or sufficiently cultured, you should be familiar with certain cultural products, like the KJV Bible, as James showed earlier, with Michael Gove sending the little Bibles around. And also various public figures like Andrew Motion, Joan Bakewell, various. Sometimes that position can get very dangerously close to intellectual snobbery to me, and I'd like to try and distance my argument a bit from that. But what I'm interested in, and why biblical literacy matters to me, is because the Bible is used in contemporary culture. And it's used in contemporary culture to address the big questions, the big social questions of our time. Questions about the representation of race, class, gender, and sexuality are all worked out using images from the Bible, using stories from the Bible, and using figures from the Bible. This use of the Bible affects our behaviour. It affects the way that we think about others. So I'm going to give you some examples. Do I need to press the PowerPoint? Here we go. Right, so I'm going to give you just a small range, just a sample of images from my research. Now, does anyone know what this is advertising? Crockery. Good, Amanda. Good. Crockery. Does anyone know what brand it's advertising? Oh, yes. Loving this group over here. Versace. Now, clearly, so it's Versace crockery. They probably didn't call it crockery. They probably had a much more sophisticated name for it than that. Now, obviously, there's a hygiene issue there that I won't go into. Probably needed quite a high temperature on the dishwasher after using those ones. But we can see that this is a very typical advertising image of Adam and Eve. It's typical because you've got an active Eve, i.e. she's got the apple. It's almost always an apple in popular culture, except when it's a pomegranate. But that's not very often. Now, here you've got Sylvester Stallone, Sly Stallone there, and typically of Adam in popular culture, he's in licensed withdrawal, which means that he's either looking away from the camera or he's staring at Eve. He's so in love with her, he can't possibly take his eyes off her. Eve is always looking straight back at the viewer. She's always meeting our eye. Now, I said that these big questions are worked out using the Bible and popular culture. Issues about gender, about constructions of sexuality, and about race. In my research, this is really sad, I've got a database. Yeah, I've got a database. So what? So what if I've got a database? I've got a database of images. I've got about 1,500 advertisements of Eve in that database. That, my friends, is how I spend my Friday and Saturday nights. It's a red letter day indeed when I find a new image. Love it. But of that number, only about 50 of the images are where Eve is not white. So we can see that something significant is being worked out here in terms of the representation of ideal femininity. These are important questions, and these affect not just the way that we behave, but the way that we see other people. Now, I'm just going to move on to an example from a department store. Yeah, she's taken a bite out of a shoe. We've all done it. We've all been there, I'm sure. Again, this is kind of conflating a little bit of Cinderella imagery, but with Eve imagery. Again, you can see this is linked with issues of consumerism as advertising, you would imagine. But to read these images, to get the images, requires some biblical literacy. Now, I want to be really clear here. I am not suggesting that there's this incredibly sky-high biblical literacy across the board, that somehow we don't know it. I'm not suggesting that. But what I am suggesting is that the situation is far more complex than just a straightforward decline that's repeatedly reported in the press. That's what I'm suggesting. It's more complex. I wrote an article recently for The Conversation, and they put a headline on it. Biblical literacy is going up, not down. Thanks, Lady Gaga. I was like, yeah, I didn't really argue that point, to be honest. But anyway, got quite a few readers, so, thanks, Lady Gaga. Now, James is right. There are lots of different types of biblical literacy, and that's another of the points that I want to make. We should really be using the plural literacies, not the singular literacy. It's misleading to suggest that we're all talking about the same thing. We aren't. We really aren't talking about the same thing. Even just if we did a quick straw poll of everybody in the audience, we'd all have different ideas, from an awareness of stories right up into, can you play Bible bingo? If I shout out a chapter and verse, can you recite it back? It's a real range of ideas. Does it mean that you need a detailed knowledge of each text? Or does it mean that you can recognise a story or where the origins of an image is? Is it just the ability to recognise images, characters or stories of the Bible? So we've got this range. And the way that we're currently constructing biblical literacy does privilege some literacies over others. I've just been saying that within English language, this idea that there are multiple literacies and that there are varying that actually, visual literacy is as important as written literacy. That doesn't seem to yet have leaked into the debate that we have about biblical literacy. So this one's very much based upon the act of reading alone, rather than seeing things from an individual way. And James mentioned earlier as well, tongue-in-cheek, young people are the ones who are ignorant. And yet, we all hear that. Kids don't know anything about the Bible. They're not getting a nativity at school. They think that Easter's about an egg. That'd make a good headline, wouldn't it? And yet, most of the biblical imagery in advertising is aimed at a younger target group. So quite often, when I talk about the Bible in advertising, I will get responses like, well, I haven't noticed any change in popular culture. I don't see the Bible in popular culture. Well, that's because it's not being targeted at your group. So advertising isn't, they don't just put an image together and then send it out and hope that it's going to get to the people that they want. It's very, very closely targeted. If you bought, say, 10 glossy women's magazines a month, like some people might, you would see the Bible is used all the time, every single month without fail. Similarly, in male-targeted sports advertising, you find that biblical imagery, messianic imagery, is used a lot. It's used a huge amount. I'm going to show you a couple of examples in a second. So, this is really weird then. We're talking about a decline, and research every year shows that this is in decline. Young people don't seem to know anything about it, and yet people like Lady Gaga, the director of Noah, Darren Aronofsky, David LaChapelle, the celebrity photographer, all of them say that they use the Bible in their work because it's recognisable, it's accessible, and it's cultural knowledge that we all share. Again, this is going in contradiction to the overall thesis of decline. So what's going on? Is this just free-floating symbolism? Is that what's going on? This has no connection to the biblical text whatsoever. It's postmodern vignettes, if you like. But if we go through some images, without at least a little bit, now, by the way, this is selling handbags, but I'm not sure that you would have got that immediately. Does anyone know who these people are? My culturally sophisticated friends over here. Anyone know? That's Madonna's ex-boyfriend. Did you know that? I knew that. That's supermodel Alessandra Ambrosio. And again, you can see license withdrawal. She's staring back at the camera, typical. Seriously, once you've seen one, you've really seen them all. That happens a lot. We could go into why that is, but I'll leave that in case you want to ask the question. Now, to have, without a little bit of knowledge of the biblical text, a little bit of biblical literacy, you wouldn't know what was going on in this advert. You wouldn't have a clue. What's the joke? You completely miss you. Without a little bit of knowledge of the Bible, these images would not function. They wouldn't be effective advertising images, and then advertisers wouldn't use them again. So it seems to me that something far more complex than a direct decline is happening. Now, James mentioned that for years the church have been concerned about decline in biblical literacy. And yes, that is the case. I worked on a project in 2012 at the Manor Lodge in Sheffield. And we were looking at, there's a site there, and they were doing an archaeological dig there, where they were looking at it used to be a kind of a village where miners in the 19th century worked. And there was quite a lot of, there was loads of evidence of, so there were like plates with kind of religious imagery on. There was quite high church, well, there was very high church attendance. All the kids went to Sunday school. And in the questions that people in authority, the church authorities were investigating, they were looking into that particular community. And they were looking into the lives of miners. Now, actually, these people lived in pretty bad conditions. And there were lots of child miners at the time. And they were going to Sunday school. And as you'd imagine, for kids who'd spent 6 days a week, working 12 hours a day down a pit, when they got to Sunday school, they were probably more likely to go to sleep than anything else. However, the church authorities investigating the lives of the miners were horrified by a perceived lack of biblical literacy. So when was this that's the 19th century, when was this golden age of biblical literacy that we're in decline from? When was it? It's a funny thing, it's a complicated issue. I was just telling the group, we were in the upper group, and I was just telling about my poor dad, who a couple of weeks ago, bless him, he didn't know what he was in for. My dad's not religious, I don't come from a religious family, but he seemed to get really worked up that there wasn't assemblies in school, so you didn't pray, you didn't sing like Christian Bible songs or anything, you didn't get taught Bible at school. I was really shocked because I wouldn't have thought that it wouldn't necessarily mean so much to my dad, but yet it clearly, nostalgia, it clearly did. And said, in schools now, there's no nativities, kids don't know about the stories of the Bible. And I got a little bit irritated. I was like, oh, is that right, Dad? Is that right? Which schools have you been in? What research have you done then? Let's see your metrics for measuring it then, shall we? Really, sorry, I was very irritated, I know I was. And my dad was like, what are you doing? But still, that's the point, that a lot of our ideas about biblical literacy, where are they coming from? Because we're not quite sure yet what exactly we're measuring. So if somebody does research on biblical literacy, and actually, for example, it's the American Bible Society, and I've just been talking about that with Matt. The American Bible Society are actually pretty open about what their ideas of biblical literacy are. So they say very openly, this number of people think that the Bible is the true word of God. They're biblically literate. We have another set of group of people who think that it's written down by just a set of stories written down by man. and they aren't biblically literate. And this is a problem. And this is what we need to do to address this problem. It's urgent. We need to get out there. We need to get to these people and kind of, I guess, create Christians. At least that's being very open about what biblical literacy is. But for the rest of us, what are we measuring? And also, there's an issue when measuring it. Now, I'm sure James will agree with me. You will agree with me, James. We work in the Department of Biblical Studies at the University of Sheffield. Now, you try going to a party on a Friday night. Now, I've already told you I don't do this a lot. But you try going to a party on a Friday night and then someone coming up to you and saying, what do you do then? You say, well, I'm a lecturer in biblical studies. You watch them run. They will hit the door as fast as you can imagine. So there's a real... Yeah, just lie. Yeah, well, there you go, you see. So there's a real issue of perception, an identity issue there as well. The Bible has become a toxic brand. If you say, I'm studying the Bible, it's almost like saying, please don't come and speak to me. That's the kind of effect it has. I work a lot in schools. I work doing widening participation, so in schools with kids who've got supposedly disadvantaged backgrounds. And I spend about 45 to 50 minutes with classes talking about my research. And after a few sessions, it became apparent to me that I was going to have to build into my sessions 10 to 15 minutes of resistance time. That's 10 to 15 minutes of time to get over the fact that they're immediately suspicious of me, of why I'm there, and what I'm trying to do. Once we've got over that, it's fine, it's all good, and they're really interested in it. During that 15 minutes, though, I will get mad answers from them about the Bible. I'll get answers like, if for example, I remember the first time when I went into school, and I was really enthusiastic. I was like, yeah, because I'm looking at advertising, so, they'll be really interested in that. It's dead popular. So I went in, feeling a bit cool, knowing that they were going to really love it. No, they really didn't. I went in, I was like, anyone know anything about the Bible? They're like, no, that's really, no way, nothing to do with me. And I thought, oh, that's really ruined, that's brought my 45 minutes right down to about 2. Because you have to kind of soften this idea, this word, Bible, first. So is it that biblical literacy is in decline? Is it a lack of interest in the Bible? Or is it a kind of political resistance against what the Bible is seen to be? About all the kind of concepts associated with the Bible. And I have some sympathy with that, actually, because I remember when I was at junior school, just a couple of, 15 years ago about, when I was at junior school, we didn't really do much Bible stuff at all, and the only thing that I can really remember was a vicar who'd come in twice a year to school. And actually, he was horrible. It was really horrible. And he'd come in and shout at us. Once there was a misunderstanding about a turkey at Christmas. He got very, very angry. For 10-year-olds, it was quite frightening. And that really put you off for life, because what was associated with that word from then on was actually, no, I don't want anything to do with that. That's really odd. So I do have some sympathy with that. I do understand what's going on there. But I think we need to make sure we don't conflate resistance with decline. That's an issue. Now, we do talk about, I'm really bad for this, I will often talk about the Bible being so embedded in culture. So those kids that I go and speak to, they do know stuff about the Bible. They do. After that 10 to 15 minutes, once we're all good, they do know. It turns out they know a lot more than they think they know, or at least they know a lot more than they were willing to give away immediately. Now, I will say, because they've got some knowledge of it, I will say, well, that's proof that the Bible's so embedded in our culture. It undergirds literature and art and music and film, and that's argued loads. I mean, we saw that during 2011 when it was the KJV anniversary. That was everywhere, people saying, this is an important part of our culture, our heritage. Well, I don't really get then, if it's such an important part of our culture, like I argue as well, if it undergirds everything, why are we so worried that it's going to lose influence? Where's the fright? Where's the worry? Where's the panic then? Because it's there, it's everywhere, it's in everything we do. So why are we scared of losing its cultural influence? Now, often people do mention, I think there is some intellectual snobbery in the debate as well, because people will often mention opera, fine art, literature, and say, you need this because you need it to understand poetry. You need it to understand fine art. Well, actually, it is in culture, and it is understood already. So we've got Cindy Crawford. This hit all the news. Did anyone see this? You might not read the newspapers it hit. It was like The Sun, The Mirror, those kind of things. And mainly they were saying that Cindy Crawford, who's about 44, was looking really, really good. So that's enough to make headlines. But what was interesting was that this is just all she's doing is holding a red apple there. And yet, if you look at the headlines, if you go and Google it and look at the headlines, it'll say, Angel from Eden. Cindy Crawford eaves it up. So they are linking it. They know where this image is from. They're linking it with the text. If we look at, anyone know who that is? See, yeah. That's Monica Bellucci. She's an actress. She was the face of Christian Dior perfume for a while. And Christian Dior Poison, Hypnotic Poison, made quite a big deal about the whole Eve story. And so she's got a snake around her neck. You can see that there's fruit here. And a lot of advertising, particularly where the Bible's used, are almost direct copies of fine art from the 19th century. You'll see that. They're almost direct copies of it. That's Alessandro Ambrosio again. You can see Eve looking directly at the camera. She's active. That was Elizabeth Hurley. When Bedazzled film came out, they advertised the film using all these images of her standing in front of Adam and Eve being thrown out of the Garden of Eden with a snake round her neck. She was playing a devil in the film and a bitten apple. None of that actually came up in the film. You can imagine my disappointment. It was rubbish as well, the film. That is 2 hours of my life I'll never see again. I still feel really angry about it. But that's how it was advertised. Again, trying to get people in using a biblical story. Got Be Delicious. Now that campaign linked with the Bible at various points, including print advertisement and promotional material around it. So there was also one where, I think it might be on here actually. Does anyone remember that advert? That was a streamed advert on TV from last year. It's for Pom Wonderful. Anyone remember it? You see, now it's all right reading your books, but what you need to do is watch a bit more telly. That's what's happening. That's the problem with biblical literacy, people. That's where the decline is. Reading your poetry and your school books. So this was an advertisement that, it was a full-length advertisement on TV, and it had someone, this guy with a really deep voice in the background saying, like, in the time of Adam and Eve, the pomegranate was powerful. And it had a whole set of these adverts where it showed that the pomegranate had been powerful at some point in history. And here we've got, I think she's Sonia Kinski, who's the daughter of Natasha Kinski. And so this is a riff on the famous photo of Natasha from, I think it was the 80s, where she was covered in a snake as well. So have a look at... So there we've got Lolita Lempicka. Again, this links back with, if you don't, you see, this is the interesting thing about advertising. you can't, I mean, the reader response means you're always going to interpret images differently. Of course you are. But what advertisers can do is they can try and limit interpretation by making sure that the text makes you associate that image with the thing that they want you to associate it with. So here you've got perfume shaped like an apple. The apple's got like a bite taken out of it. And you've got the first perfume, Lolita Lempicka. That was part, I was so excited. My friends all send me images when they see any kind of biblical image, which is a bit annoying sometimes, you know, especially when, that's not even advertising, stop sending me images. You've just drawn that, why are you sending it to me? So this was for Vampire Diaries, and again, the whole series of promotional imagery was based around this idea of like vampires, but connected with Garden of Eden and Eve. So it's, again, all very much female-targeted young women. That was Caprica series. Big promotional thing on that, but it was a bit rubbish, so it finished after a series. But what was interesting about this one was, you can see this was heavily advertised, and you can see we've got typical Eve image, looking coyly. I won't do that again, I'm so sorry. Looking coyly over her shoulder, looking straight at the camera, holding the apple up. And yet, when it had the men from the show, it had a similar kind of theme. So it had a tree with an apple hanging off it, and they were completely suited. So they'd got like a tie on, a collar, suited, black suit, just going, looking at the apple. So it's amazing how you can see issues in gender representation in these images as well. That's for Weeds, again you can see. Now here, so this is an American TV series that's, we've got it here as well. Now the reason why there's a big gap over this side is because in magazines they had a double page spread where you had her on this side, and on the other side, I can't remember his name, it's the guy from X-Files. David Duchovny. It had him in his series, California. Thank you. That's why he's a professor. Now he does watch telly. He does watch some television. It's Californication, and he's got an apple in that. So it was a double page spread linking both of them to biblical stories. Desperate Housewives, it's just a truism now to say that that's connected with Edenic imagery. They did it for every single series except for one, when they did like a riff on 1950s housewives, like Sexy Housewives. That didn't do that well, so they went back to the Eden thing again. Right, does anyone know what this is? Anyone know what it is? You won't know, because it's an advert for Emmerdale. Emmerdale. Yeah, I know. And so she was a character in Emmerdale, and this is the really weird bit of this. So this is advertising a storyline in Emmerdale when she was about to start a relationship with a stepbrother, half-brother, something like that. So obviously, you create an advertising campaign with Eve in it. What? Original Sin Cider originates in New York, and every year they bring out a new advert, and I'm just going every night on their website like, have they brought it out yet? Have they brought it out yet? I'm so excited. But to find the models for these images, they have a competition, like a standard sort of beauty competition, where women choose to enter, and then they come on and they get judged on whether they fit, you know, the kind of look that Original Sin Cider is looking for, and the prize is to be the latest Eve in the photograph. Again, this is trying to show very, very similar positions, again over the shoulder, looking directly at the camera, license withdrawal over there with Animal Temptation. Anyone bought that perfume? Yeah, you have, you liars, I bet you have. Again, when they're together, you can see. Now, this is one that I used in the article I was telling you about. You can't quite, can you see that from where you are? It's for a restaurant called Bobby's, I think it's Bobby's Tap Room or something, but they sell ribs. So again, if you don't have a little bit of knowledge about that biblical story, well, what have I done? I'm not touching it. If you don't have a little bit of knowledge about that story, it's just, is that not weird? It's weird even if you've got some knowledge of the story, that is still very odd. But, the whole hilarious joke is that it's got a skull where his rib's been taken out, because we've got Eve, and, that really makes you want to go and eat ribs, doesn't it? That was what my initial thought was when I saw it. But you have to have some even basic understanding. And then we have the whole Twilight phenomenon, which is ever so slightly outdated now. But nevertheless, the first Twilight book and the promotional material surrounding the release of the first film was heavily based on Genesis, the book of Genesis. So it had a quote from Genesis 2:17 in it, and that brought back a lot of kids, especially young women, to look at the biblical text, to see if that would help them, elucidate the story of Twilight anymore. But nevertheless, it did bring them back to the text. So, for me, there's something way, way more complicated going on. If we look at these advertisements from Sky Sports. So, miracles happen, you can see here, miracles happen only on Sky Sport. And each advertisement had a different miracle in it. Now, there's something to say, actually, because they do look a bit children's Bible. With the colours, and it is reminiscent of that. So it might be that if people have had, a children's Bible, they might pick it up because the colours and the framing of it reminds them. However, that would be a bit of a useless advert if you've got if you don't know anything at all. That's rubbish. That's useless. And that's multi-million pounds wasted. I don't think so, really. I don't think so. I think that they're way better at marketing than that. So this was another example. And so these are famous sports people. I had to look who they were up because I had no idea. And then we've got David LaChapelle, who did a whole spread for ID magazine that then turned into his exhibition called Jesus is My Homeboy, and then he did another one called American Jesus later. And again, you can see that each one, you could get that from art, but each one, you have to have something to get what's going on in these images. And then we've got, because we were talking about it upstairs, so I had to include a little bit of it, we've got good old Lady Gaga, who always loves a bit of religious iconography in a work. So I've shown you a little bit, so I'm gonna conclude because I've talked for enough time. So there seems to be, to me at least, and from the research that I've been doing and the discussions that I've been having, there's actually a dual resistance. I don't think it is just the kids when I go into school and they say, no, the Bible's nothing to do with me, I don't know anything about it and I don't want to. It's not just that, if people ask me what I do at parties and I say I'm a biblical scholar, they do a runner. I choose to think that they do a runner because I've said biblical scholar, by the way. Maybe that's not the case. But I think there's a dual resistance, because there's also a real resistance to recognising that the Bible is used in contemporary culture. And that it's not just that it's used a lot in contemporary culture. And I'm not really sure why that seems to be an uncomfortable issue. It's there, it's evidenced, it's demonstrated. It is if you buy any magazines. There seems to be a real buy-in to this theory of decline. So is this really about biblical literacies? Surely, if it's about the preservation of the place of the Bible in culture, then the frequent use of the Bible in popular culture is something to be celebrated. Maybe not the way that it represents gender and race and sexuality. That's not necessarily to be celebrated at all. That's to be critiqued. But what's the problem? with it being used? Why do we have to deny its use? Or why do we have to say, this is not, you don't need any knowledge of the Bible to see these images? Is it actually about the way that we're exposed to the Bible rather than about levels of literacy? Is it actually about anxieties about the future of Christianity, especially among young people? It is noticeable that the vast majority of research into biblical literacy has been Christian affiliated, even the stuff that's been done in academic institutions. Now, I'm not saying that that's a bad thing at all. I don't think it's a bad thing. But it does demonstrate that the research that's happening is coming from a particular perspective. And any other perspectives that are out there are quite thin on the ground. Now, I'm going to finish. But I'm going to say, I'm going to come clean, I'm not especially interested in promoting the Bible for promoting the Bible's sake. Plenty of people do that. I don't think that needs to be my job. But rather, I'm interested in promoting a critical approach to the Bible. And by critical, I don't mean a negative approach to the Bible. I mean an analytical approach to the Bible, looking at which texts are used and why they're used. How are they being used? What are they being used for? What are they saying about our culture and our social relationships? Far more important than just being able to quote biblical text is being able to read closely and critically, whether that's the Bible itself as a text or images of the Bible in advertising. I'm going to leave it there. Thank you.